Well, thank you for that very warm welcome. Thank you, Cliff, for your very gracious introduction. Thank you, Mayor Sarno, and thank you, Senator Lesser. The fact that you came out here for a Republican shows that and to show that they truly believe in tolerance. I shouldn't say this here, but I will anyway because you're still ahead. I'm a Yankees fan. So they do believe in diversity and tolerance. But it is a great pleasure to be here, and as indicated, I'm going to make some remarks about the economy, how we get this engine really going again, and the problems and the opportunities, and also what might be done here in the Commonwealth to get things really revved up. But couldn't be more timely, and we see in Washington today a good example of a saying of Bismarck, who created Germany, unified Germany in the late 1800s. Bismarck once said, "There are two things polite people should not see being made. One is sausages, and the other is laws." And when you see how Congress is dealing with health care and taxes, Bismarck is onto something. The economy itself is improving somewhat, but it's like a baseball player who's been hitting 230. Now he's hitting 250, 260. Nice. But we should be hitting 320, 340, 360. We're barely out of second gear. And the question is, what can we do to get this thing going? What are the big obstacles? Let me start with the one in the headlines today, taxes. The thing, and I'll then deal with health care, which I think just confirms, they say, comics like to say, the Democrats are the evil party and the Republicans are the stupid party. And when it comes to health care, the Republicans certainly have been living up to that reputation. But I'll get to that in a moment. But the thing to remember about taxes in this whole thing, there's just a couple of things. One is, if taxes just don't raise revenue for government, they're also a price and a burden. For example, the tax you pay on income is the price you pay for working. The tax on profits is the price you pay if you're successful in business. Tax on capital gains, the price you pay for taking risks that work out. And the thing to remember about taxes is if you lower the price of good things like productive work, risk-taking, and success, you'll get more of them. John Kennedy recognized that. Ronald Reagan recognized that. A handful of other countries around the world have recognized that. So in terms of the Republican floundering today, and I say Republicans since they control the Congress, they made a couple of mistakes. The first big one was taking up health care before taxes. Health care, as they suddenly discovered, is a complicated subject. Taxes may be complicated, but cutting them is a fairly straightforward, or should be a fairly straightforward exercise. So why in the news today do you have all of this really lack of discord, or total discord, among Republicans about what they're going to do on the tax side? The president says one thing, Speaker Ryan of the House says another, the Republicans in the Senate say another. What is going on here? Well, why didn't they just do a straight tax cut? And the reason is, in times past, when people try to predict the future, you remember with the Greeks, they had the thing called the Delphic Oracle. A lot of hocus pocus, but they had steam and stuff, and so they took it seriously when the guy didn't say anything, but it sounded profound. The Romans, perhaps because they had a Las Vegas gene in them, had Vestal virgins dance around when they'd make projections. But in Washington today, they don't even have anything exciting as dancing virgins. They have a thing called the Congressional Budget Office that does computer printouts trying to pretend they can predict what's going to happen 10 years from now. So if you make a change in the tax code, you make a change in health care, what is the impact going to be 10 years from now, 5 years from now? If they really knew that, they would not be working in the Congressional Budget Office. They would be buying lottery tickets. They would be speculating in commodities and stocks if they knew the future. But the Republicans especially worship the Congressional Budget Office. even though the CBO, as they call it, never gets their projections right. And on and on they go. And so, for example, the way the CBO projects tax cuts, tax rate cuts, was that that has very little impact on the economy. You know, going back, they said the Kennedy tax cuts wouldn't have worked. They did work. They said the Reagan tax cuts wouldn't work. They did work. Lower the price on people and they'll do it. And so in terms of the people like Paul Ryan just love this Congressional Budget Office projections. You learn more about the future, just not to beat this horse. I can't beat the horse because Peter would object, but you learn more from your daily horoscope than you will from the CBO in terms of what the future lies. And the thing is, if you get a big fat tax cut, even if the deficit goes up temporarily, growth will cure it. You don't have to cut a lot of stuff. You don't have to cut anything. Growth will cure it. For example, in the last 10 years, which have been very disappointing in economic growth, far below our historic standards, if we'd had average growth in the last 10 years that this country had had for the previous 230 years, average, there'd be no budget deficit today. The books would be balanced, even at 3.5%. It's amazing what compounding does. Incomes would be 20, 25% higher. So if you're earning $40,000, imagine if you have $50,000. Life would be a lot better. So the fact of the matter is, on the tax side, they should just cut it across the board. Now, they're talking about reforming the tax code. It's too late for that. They've wasted too much time. Not only did they take the CBO seriously, and that's why they went with health care first. And this shows how crazy they are. They took up health care first because the CBO said that if they did what they wanted to do with Obamacare, they would save $1 trillion over 10 years. Now, the Democrats glommed onto this very quickly. Oh, you're going to cut health care for people to have a big corporate tax cut? The Republicans lost the debate on that right off the beginning. People said, Obamacare may not be that good, but why don't we try to fix it instead of throwing Aunt Tilly out on the street? And so they lost the debate on that. So on the tax side, it's too late to do real reform in terms of trying to get preferences out, because if you touch one deduction, you're going to have to touch all the deductions. You just can't cherry pick them. For example, they still think they're going to do it away with deductibility of state and local taxes, property taxes. Good luck. Ain't going to happen. Even though California is a blue state, even though New York is a blue state, they have a number of representatives who are Republican. They're not going to vote for it. Guys, get over it. So what should be happening with all this confusion, and I think it will happen, they will eventually do something simple and just do an across-the-board tax cut like Reagan did in the early 80s and save real reform for later. And so why will they do that? Because of a thing called the instinct of self-preservation. The Republicans now realize there are elections next year. And if they don't get this economy really moving, they are going to take a hit. Donald Trump doesn't come up for re-election until 2020. They come up on the House side next year, and a number of Senate seats come up next year. So what they, and it sort of reminds one of a saying, or something that Samuel Johnson was the man who invented the modern English dictionary. And over 200 years ago, Johnson said, the prospect of a hanging focuses the mind tremendously. For the Republicans, the prospect of a political hanging is going to eventually focus their minds. So what will they end up doing? Just to give you an advance on it, on the business side, everyone recognizes, including the Democrats, that we have the worst business tax in the world. So they'll cut that. I think they'll get it down to 15 or 18%, make it from the worst in the world to one of the best in the world. They'll make a few other tweaks, make it easier to bring back profits from overseas, over $2 trillion sitting overseas. Make it easy to bring that back so we get this money working here at home instead of sitting over in overseas banks. On the individual side, they'll double at least the exemptions that you have in the current code. So if you're making $40,000, $50,000 a year, you'll automatically get, right off the bat, a $1,500 tax cut. They'll also, I think, end up cutting tax rates across the board, as John Kennedy did and Ronald Reagan did, and just be done with it. Get it done, make it big. The Congressional Budget Office will react very badly. That'll be a good sign. The more they don't like it, the better for the American people. And get this economy kicked off. Another thing I think they're going to do, even though Speaker Paul Ryan won't want to do it, is make the tax cuts retroactive. So even if they pass them in October or November or December, make it retroactive to, say, March 1st or even January 1st of this year. So the thing really kicks in and kicks in fast. In April, people get nice refunds. That'll help gin up the economy as well. They'll finally do what they should have done at the beginning of the year. But strangely, in addition to the CBO, the Republicans, headed by Paul Ryan, Speaker Ryan, wanted to put in a new tax as part of the tax cut. It was called the Border Adjustment Tax, fancy word for a 20% sales tax on imports, which, since a lot of things you buy, like you buy an Apple iPad, has parts from all over the world. You buy your car, even if it's put here together in America, a lot of those parts come from overseas. And so the result of this 20% sales tax would have been that working families would have been hit in the solar plexus. The price of a typical vehicle would go up $2,500. Price of gasoline up 30 cents a gallon. And so when Ryan was asked, why would you do this? He said, in effect, we need to raise taxes to cut taxes. Now, this is not Alice in Wonderland. This is Washington. Maybe it's the closest thing to it. But just ponder that. You're going to raise taxes to cut taxes. You're going to hit the very people who elected you. It just made no sense. But we had to fight this for 8 or 9, almost 10 months before they've dropped this crazy idea. But eventually on the tax side, they'll get it right. Now, ultimately, what should happen is take this current tax code and just throw it all out. Just put it in perspective. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, defined the character of the American nation, was all of 272 words. Declaration of Independence, a little over 1,300 words. Constitution and the amendments, a little over 7,000 words. The Bible, which took centuries to put together, 773,000 words. Now the Federal Income Tax Code and all the attendant rules and regulations, 10 million words and rising. And nobody knows really what's in it. Nobody. Just several years ago, Money Magazine did a survey. They took a hypothetical family's finances, gave the numbers to 46 different tax preparers, people considered expert in the field. And you know what they got back? 46 different returns, 46 different estimates, thousands, in some cases, thousands of dollars of difference. This from people who make their living at the thing. They couldn't agree what the family owed. How many of you can prepare your return on your own? Not unless you're crazy and think you can. And even if you have software, you say, well, I've got some good, let the software do it. Software doesn't work. In a book I recently wrote, co-authored, called Reviving America, we point out that depending on your circumstances, different software packages will give you different calculations of what your income tax is. So they don't even really know. And so it's not just, so what should be done is just take this current tax code, which is just a cesspool of corruption, corrupt deals, brings out the worst in us, throw it out, and I was going to say bury it, but the EPA might not allow it since it's so toxic. Just throw it out and start all over again. Replace it with a simple flat tax. And the amazing thing is when you throw all this junk out, amazing thing is a family of 4, you take a family of 4, their first $52,800 of salary would be free of federal income tax. $52,800 free of federal, and above that, 17 cents on the dollar. No tax on your savings. And how about no death tax? You should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS, you know. And do the same thing on the business side, clean the thing up. And it's not just an economic issue, it's a moral issue. The IRS calculates that we now spend 6 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. 6 billion. Experts estimate that we spend upwards of $300 to $400 billion a year complying with the tax code. Just go back 20 years. Take all those tens of billions of hours, literally trillions of dollars, immense brain power, and imagine, instead of this useless, corrupt code, those resources have been used to create new products, new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases, how much better off we'd be today. That huge monumental waste. So get rid of it. We shouldn't tolerate that kind of thing. I don't care what you are, Democrat, Independent, Mooney, whatever. Just get rid of the thing. But they're not going to do it now. But I hope that someday there'll be enough public pressure to do what 40 other countries have done and put in a simple code so we can focus our time and brain power and energy on something productive instead of a corrupt code that nobody understands and just feeds the beast of corruption. Now, on the healthcare side, we have to ask ourselves, this whole debate, why do we have a healthcare crisis? It's not the quality of healthcare in this country. Overall, it's the best in the world. Overall, it's the best in the world. And people say, well, the problem is people like me are getting older. We want more healthcare services. That drives up the price. People have affordability problems, and we got a big crisis. But step back and ask yourself a very basic question. Why is demand for more healthcare considered a crisis, whereas more demand for anything else in this economy is considered an opportunity? Think of it. You want more cars and trucks? Detroit and other manufacturers, glad to come to your assistance. You want more apps? Writers, glad to come to your assistance. You want more food? Grocery stores, restaurants, glad to help you out. You want more basketballs? Hey, some people here, glad to help you out. And so, why is healthcare so different? And the basic answer is we don't have real free markets in healthcare. We have pieces of it, but basically it's a third-party system. There's a disconnect, if you think about it, between providers and consumers, between doctors and patients. The patient is not in charge, unlike other markets where the customer is ultimately in charge. Nobody designed this system. It grew out of World War II and some tax rulings in the 1950s, so nobody designed it. So pointing fingers saying, oh, it's their fault, it's that fault. No, it's the whole system that grew up that created this mess, and that's how we have to tackle the thing, step by step. So it's, and to see it, take, for example, hospitals. We will all end up in hospital from time to time. Hospitals know their revenues depend less on satisfying you than on how well they negotiate with insurance companies, with the government, Medicare, Medicaid, and perhaps large employers. Nobody designed it, but that's the way it is. And to see where the patient lies in all of this, look at it this way. The lousiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with another guest with a curtain in between. A sick guest. Think of it. Because we've grown up with it, we don't realize how crazy this is. And you know, if you get a private room, oh my gosh, I got a private room. Whereas you go to any hotel or motel, private, yeah, you assume that. Or take those robes they give you that, you know, been washed, look like 10,000 times, something the Salvation Army gave, that, you know, you don't know whether you put it on the front, on the back, on the top, on the bottom. And that thing has grown up that way. And we don't also realize how expensive this system is because we're told it's free. For example, prices. If you go to a clinic or hospital and you ask in advance what a treatment costs, you get a very strange look. means one of two things. Either you're uninsured or you're crazy. Why would you want to know the price? Insurance will cover it. Maybe, but what's it to you? A friend of mine over in New Hampshire, a couple of years ago, had some heart problem, goes to the cardiologist. And so one of the tests the cardiologist recommends is what they call a nuclear stress test. Apparently they put something in you and you see how the blood flow, whatever. So nuclear, it's not a bomb, just what they call this thing. And by the way, just as an aside, why do social scientists call families nuclear families? As if they're radioactive, maybe the mother-in-laws, but why do they call it nuclear family? I never got that. But anyway, nuclear stress test. So in all innocence, the fellow asks, what's it going to cost? The doc says, I don't know. Insurance will cover it. This guy, being an entrepreneur, and therefore not quite normal, he wants to make things happen, he and his colleagues go around to 25 different clinics and hospitals in the region and get the price of a nuclear stress test. This is done the same way everywhere, so it's not as if one does it differently from another. The price range from $1,450 to $7,300. Same test. So, end of story. Guy goes back to the cardiologist and says, there's a clinic nearby, a little more expensive, but I'll go to that, the $1,600 variety. And the cardiologist looks at him and says, what? He says, this costs more than $1,400? I had no idea. True story. Gets up, does some calculations, says, with your particular condition, there's less than a 2% chance this test will tell us something useful. Why don't we just drop it? True story. True story. We don't even know what prices are. And we don't even know over our lifetime how much health care really costs us, because we're told it's free. But several years ago, a guy did some studies on this and calculated, this is amazing, that if you actually add up over your lifetime what you spend not just on co-pays and deductibles and things like that, but also add in the taxes you pay over your life to finance Medicare. That comes out of your paycheck each month. Taxes you pay to finance Medicaid on the federal level. Taxes you pay to finance Medicaid on the state level. Calculate what you've lost in salary, because if they're spending $10,000 or $15,000 on your health insurance policy, that means your salary's less. Add it up over a lifetime. All these things we don't even really realize. Over a lifetime, the cost of health care is $1.9 million, and we don't even know it. And so, okay, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And so there's some basic reforms. We're not going to solve this overnight. So these big bills they try to pass, forget it. Do it piece by piece. But let's do some basics. We have a little checklist. How about, among other things, nationwide shopping for health insurance? Right now, it's state by state. Each state has their own rules and market, and you can't buy a policy across state lines. I live in New Jersey. Before Obamacare made all policies virtually the same, I could get a perfectly good policy in neighboring Pennsylvania at half the price in New Jersey, but it was illegal. I could buy shoes in Pennsylvania, buy a necktie, can't buy the insurance. Let's have nationwide shopping. Have scores of companies compete for your business. How about equal tax treatment? If you're an employer or self-employed, you get a tax deduction for your premiums. But if you're an individual, you don't like what's out there, you have to buy it individually, you pay with after-tax dollars. Not fair. Make it equal. How about transparency? I mentioned pricing. How about having clinics and hospitals post prices for everything before the procedure, all up front, instead of waiting 3 years and getting a bill and wondering what was this for, all different bills coming in. There's a hospital, and there's several other hospitals that followed are trying this, in Oklahoma called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. And they did something that sounded absolutely wacko. What they did is they don't take insurance. It's all cash, credit card. They cut out all the insurance bureaucracy, all that kind of bureaucracy. And as a result, their prices are so low that many providers, employers are finding that even though they can't get it covered by insurance, it's still cheaper to do the surgery there than to do elsewhere. The state of Oklahoma now recommends for certain kinds of surgeries, their people go to the surgery center because it's so cheap. And it's not that they cut on quality, because they've cut out all that bureaucracy, they're able to pay high prices to get top surgeons. And they post everything. And if the price comes in higher, they eat it. And so you're going to. So how about getting transparency on pricing? So why is that MRI 5 times here than it is elsewhere? What's the value of that? And because deductibles keep going up and up, you see it on the exchanges, you see it in the private sector, this is going to matter more and more people. Have pricing transparency. Another form of transparency. How about requiring hospitals to post each month how many patients die of infections received after they're admitted to the hospital? Not before, after. Now, we all know when you go to the hospital, you're sick, you're more prone to get some infection. We understand that. But it's estimated, did at Johns Hopkins, that 90,000 patients die each year in this country at hospitals from infections received after they're admitted to the hospital. Nursing homes, I've seen estimates of 300,000. But of the 90,000, at least 70,000 could have been saved through rigorous procedures in terms of trying to avoid infections. 70,000. Now, no food chain could get away with that. Think of it. Remember Chipotle? How much trouble they got in? Thankfully, no one died, but they still taken a real hit from that food poisoning. So transparency, and then more choice on the kind of policy you want. I don't need baby services. I don't need pregnancy services. You're going to have to pay for it. It's crazy. So get a little more patient control, more patient participation, more competition. Because the thing is, we want a system, and people say, well, healthcare is different. Well, everything is different. But just take food. Food is more basic than healthcare, medical care. Without food, nothing else much matters. Well, we don't have the government running the farms. If it did, we'd have no more obesity. We'd all be starving. They tried it in China and Russia, disaster. So even though the government's involved in agriculture more than I would like, they're involved. Agriculture still produces the food. Companies may process the food. Trucks deliver the food. Grocery stores, supermarkets, farmers markets sell the food. And if people have problems, we have everything from food banks to food stamps to deal with it. Why can't we do the same thing in healthcare? Have entrepreneurship to get the kind of productivity and breakthroughs, but have more effective and uniform safety nets than the hodgepodge system we have today. That's what we should be aiming for. They're not mutually exclusive, and big breakthroughs are coming, in cancer, immunotherapies, especially for lung cancer. Big promising things happening. I saw the other day this little thing that looked like a little stick. It's a defibrillator. Today they're big. These little things, if they fully develop it, you feel something's happening. You don't have to have somebody try to find a defibrillator. You can just do it right away. Big stuff. And what's happening in genetics is huge. There's a fellow named Craig Venter who did the human genome. And he's now, with MRIs, very sophisticated MRIs and genome testing, finding ways to detect diseases before the symptoms show up. They've done tests on several thousand people. The requirement was they all be healthy, or at least ostensibly healthy. Turns out 40%, 4 out of 10, were not healthy, even though they looked to be healthy, including Venter himself. He had a raging prostate cancer that did not show up in the PSA tests. So, and right now it's very expensive. He says it costs about $25,000, but he thinks in a couple of years as they get these more sophisticated equipment, you can get it down to 4,000, only 2,000. So you can know in advance. People say, I don't want to know what might happen to me. Actually, you do, because then you can do something about it. You can take preventive measures instead of having it hit you where it may be too late. So big positive stuff is coming. And by the way, in closing on healthcare, and let me just say one thing. Mammograms are supposed to detect breast cancer. Because if you, like most cancers, and I had cancer prostate several years ago, if you detect it early, your chances of survival are increased enormously. But with mammograms, if you have what they call dense tissue, mammograms, traditional mammograms, aren't very good at detecting early breast cancer. Now they've souped up the mammograms supposedly better, but there's another test called MBI. 40% plus women have dense tissue, so this is a real issue. I have 5 daughters, so this gets personal. 40% have dense tissue. There's a test called molecular breast imaging, MBI, molecular breast imaging. Mayo Clinic has done a lot of work on this. It's 2 to 3 times better than traditional mammograms at finding early breast cancer. So when you go for it, ask about MBI. They'll tell you, because sometimes it's very slow to get these breakthroughs. But if it's good enough for Mayo, I figure it's good enough for everyone else. And insist on it. They'll say, well, it costs more money. They're false positive. Well, they're false positive with every diagnostic test. So take a real look at MBI, one thing to take away tonight. So on the tax side, make a big tax cut. The deficit will take care of itself. The key thing is get that economy growing. If we get it back to 4%, after 10 years of 1.5%, get it to 4%, get it a little above average, not going to be a problem at all. Not going to be a problem. And you'd think the politicians would be awake to this. Growth covers a multitude of sins. Bill Clinton, for example, had big problems in the mid-90s, you may recall. One critical reason he survived was the economy was doing well, people felt good. By contrast, in the 1970s, none of you were around in the 1970s. Yeah, that's called pandering. I tried it in politics, didn't work, which is why I'm here tonight. But in the 1970s, when Nixon had his problems with Watergate, the economy was in terrible shape. Rapidly rising prices, rapidly rising unemployment, and the feeling nobody knew what to do. Things were spinning out of control. Very, very bad atmosphere. You know, if Bill Clinton had a Nixon-like economy, I think he'd have been run out of office. If Nixon had a Bill Clinton kind of economy, he might have well survived Watergate because the mood was very, very different. So growth helps. Entitlement reform helps a lot of things. So just do the big fat tax cut. Don't worry about CBO. Just do it. If you have problems with it, you can fix it, tweak it later. Get the big thing done. And the same thing on healthcare. Do it piece by piece and get more and more patient control. And good things will start to happen. We see it in small little areas, like LASIK surgery for the eyes. There's no disconnect between provider and consumer. So therefore, providers have every incentive to make it more affordable for you, better outcome for you. Our publisher, 12 years ago, had it done, cost $5,000. He said he'd get a better result today doing it for $2,500. Got to get that in healthcare. Instead of thinking about rationing healthcare or how do we knock down the prices, let innovation and competition do it, and you'll be the beneficiary of it. Now, one final thing, and I have to do it. There's one other big issue, and I warn you in advance, it's probably the most boring subject in the world. It's the Federal Reserve and monetary policy. Not the most exciting thing in the world. So, as a reward for what I'm about to do to you, let me give you a travel tip. If you ever find yourself in an airplane, in coach, middle seat, on the runway, watching your life pass away? You want a little bit of elbow room with your seatmates? Start talking to them about monetary policy. They'll cut you a wide berth, guaranteed. If any of you here tonight are single and ever find yourself, despite the dating services, on a bad date, you want out, start talking about the Fed and monetary policy, and the evening will end very quickly, and you'll never see that person again. Guaranteed. But we have to deal with it, because even if you get the health care right, you get the money right, you get other things right, if you get the health care right and you get the tax right, but if you don't get the money right, you're going to be in trouble. Why? Because money is how we deal with each other. It's how we make progress. You know, in the old days, they had barter. Barter was very inefficient. Imagine if we had barter today, trying to deposit a cow into an ATM, or withdrawing a pair of shoes from an ATM. Very, very, very difficult. Money just makes transactions easier. And so money works best when it has a stable value. Money measures prices. Money's not wealth. Money measures wealth. Money measures value. It's not wealth in and of itself. You know, in wintertime, sadly it's coming again, you go to a restaurant, you check your coat, what do you get in return? Piece of paper, piece of plastic. In and of itself, that plastic is worthless, but it's a claim on a very real thing, your coat. You buy a ticket to an event, whether it's ellipsis on your handheld or a piece of paper ticket, worthless in and of itself, but it's a claim on a real service, a real thing. Money is like claim checks. If you understand that money's like claim checks, you're ahead of 99% of the central bankers in this world. Central bankers think the way to deal with obesity is to change the number of ounces in a pound. You know, make it 32, voila, I've lost 50%. Whoa, this is great stuff. Great stuff. Great stuff. And so, money's like scales that measure weight, or a clock that measures time, or a ruler that measures space. Money measures value. So just imagine if our central bank, the Federal Reserve, was put in charge of the Time Bureau and did to clocks and watches, timepieces, what it does to the dollar. Imagine that, 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 minutes an hour the day after, 10 minutes the day after that. Life would be chaotic. But that's what they do with money. Currency trading's now $5 trillion a day. You have all this brain power, not just doing stupid things on the tax code, but also trying to get little bits and pennies, mini pennies from each trade on currency trading. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Now imagine if you had a floating clock trying to bake a cake. It says bake the batter 30 minutes. Was that nominal minutes? Inflation-adjusted minutes? Is it a Massachusetts minute? A Mexican minute? It'd be chaotic. And so the key thing is on the Fed. Stop mucking around with the dollar. Stop manipulating interest rates. Interest rates is the price you pay to rent the money. And the Fed is manipulating it, suppressing it. It sounds like it's free. Oh, free money, zero interest rates. It reminds one of the old saying in the old joke in the Soviet Union. The health care is free, but you can't get any. And so what, long story short, what the Federal Reserve and these people have done, what the regulators have done, is make it very hard for small and new businesses to get adequate credit. Jamie Dimon, who heads up J.P. Morgan, huge bank, said the other day, because of regulation and non-functioning credit markets or ill-functioning credit markets, loans are $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion less today than they would have been otherwise. And who is hurt by that? Not the government, not a big company like Apple. It's small businesses, new businesses, medium-sized businesses. Just on the regulatory side, you get a mortgage now, you may get it, but look, all the paperwork you go through. If you want a loan, you pledge the lives of your grandchild. I mean, it's crazy. So what the Fed short-term should do, stop manipulating interest rates. You should set the rates. Stop punishing seniors, stop hurting small businesses. And the other thing is, reduce their bloated portfolio. They have seized in the last 5, 7 years, and nobody's paid attention in Washington, $4 trillion of assets in this economy. Just calling up and say, give us it to us, we'll credit your account, but they now own more than $4.5 trillion of government bonds and mortgages. What they should do is when those bonds mature, when the interest rates come in, let the money go back into the economy and be put to productive work instead of stagnating. So, money, not the most exciting topic, but critical. And again, if you understand claim check, measuring value, you're way, way ahead of most. So bottom line, we got a lot of problems here, but the also nice thing about these things is you can correct them. We've done it before. And you take Massachusetts, you take Western Massachusetts, there's no reason why in a vigorous economy, especially with high tech today, that this area shouldn't boom again. The key thing is to get the economy booming, look at any barriers to people starting businesses, because the big things often come from people you've never heard of, people from the most unlikely backgrounds end up doing things. And why is Seattle, Washington doing so well? Yeah, they had Boeing, but Boeing was on its back 40 years ago. The joke was the last person in Seattle, please turn out the lights. And then out of nowhere, a little Starbucks rose up. A couple of dropouts moved from New Mexico, Microsoft, Amazon. Looked like a little bookseller online. Look what that's become. So these little things can become big things. Just create the right environment. Have a good national economy, have a good environment here, and then quality of life becomes important. One of the nice things about tech is you can be anywhere and still function. Geography is not the limitation in many ways that it was. And don't hesitate to go out there and say why this is a good place. People aren't going to learn it by osmosis. With social media, you hit it again and again and again. And people say, well, maybe there's something here I should look at. And once they look, you got a chance. So bottom line, yeah, Washington looks dysfunctional, but thank God for elections. Republicans realize that most of them don't really want to become Uber drivers after November of next year. So, and will they get some Democrats on board? Could be. Could be. So why not? Go for it. Thank you all very much. Thank you.